On a temple wall in southern Egypt, there is a carving that tourists photograph by accident. It sits in a low, cramped stone room, half in shadow, just above the floor. Most people walk right past it. They came to see the gods on the upper walls. They never look down, so they never see the machine. Because that is what it is. Not a god, not a symbol, a machine. Carved into the stone is a long, sealed vessel, taller than a man. A cable runs out of its base. A figure stands beside it, holding the whole thing upright, the way an engineer steadies a generator that is under load. And inside the vessel, coiled from one end to the other, is something the Egyptians drew over and over again in their sacred rooms, but never once explained. Egyptologists labeled the panel religious art and moved on. But the people who built the pyramids did not carve decoration into their hardest, most protected stone. They were recording something. And if you follow what they recorded, line by line, symbol by symbol, it does not lead up to heaven. It leads down, under the sand, to a sealed chamber that, according to their own instructions, still holds the machine that built the pyramids. That chamber has a location. The hieroglyphs give it. And in 2017, a scan of the Great Pyramid found something exactly where the ancient texts said it would be. This is the story of what the machine actually was, what the carvings actually say, and the precise place the Egyptians claim it is still buried. Stay with me, because the part everyone misses is not the carving. It is the address. Let's start with the wall itself. The carving sits in the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, about 60 kilometers north of Luxor. The temple you can walk through today was finished under the Ptolemies, but it was built directly on top of far older foundations, copying older texts that the priests insisted came from the first time, the age before the pyramids, when, in their words, the gods walked the earth and built in stone. The machine panels are not in the open halls. They are in the crypts, narrow chambers hidden inside the thickness of the walls, sealed, accessible only through a small hatch in the floor. You do not put your most casual art in your most hidden room. You put the things you do not want lost. When the crypts were rediscovered and copied in the 1800s, scholars were baffled. The reliefs did not match standard religious scenes. So they were filed under obscure mythology, a snake inside a lotus, the breath of creation, and largely ignored for a century. For decades, scholars dismissed them as symbolic. Then engineers started looking instead of theologians, and the symbolic explanation developed a problem. If you find buried history as unsettling as I do, take 1 second right now and subscribe and turn on the bell. I dig up the discoveries that got sealed, reclassified, or quietly buried in an archive every single week. And this channel only works if the algorithm knows you want this. Now back to the wall, because the carving is only the first clue, and it is the least strange one. Here is what the ancient texts actually claim, in their own words. And this is where mythology starts reading like a manual. The Egyptians did not say men dragged the pyramid stones up ramps with rope and muscle. That is our theory. We invented it because it is the only method we can prove a Bronze Age population could perform. But the Egyptians themselves told a different story, and they told it consistently for 3,000 years. They said the great blocks were lifted by what they called the divine word. They said the stone was made light. One inscription describes the master builders as those who command the stone to walk. Another describes a sound, a single sustained tone, that the priests directed at the rock until, in the carving's phrasing, the heavy thing forgot its weight. Mainstream Egyptology reads all of this as poetry. Kings boasting, priests dressing up ordinary labor in cosmic language to glorify the pharaoh. And on its own, that reading is reasonable. People exaggerate, especially people carving propaganda into temple walls. But that explanation has a problem. The Egyptians were not vague when they recorded real things. Their grain inventories are exact. Their tax records are exact. Their star tables are accurate enough that we still use them to date the rest of the ancient world. These were not people who confused metaphor with measurement. When they wanted to lie, they exaggerated numbers. When they wanted to record, they were almost obsessively literal. So, the question is simple. What if the descriptions of the pyramid machine are not the boasting parts? What if they are the literal parts? That brings us to the first clue. In the first place, the poetry turns into engineering. Clue 1 is the vessel in the crypt, the sealed object with the cable running from its base and the coiled shape inside. The conventional reading calls it a lotus flower giving birth to a snake, a creation symbol. Beautiful, religious, safe. But look at what the figures are actually doing. They are not worshiping the object, they are operating it. One figure supports the vessel. Another holds the base of the cable where it meets a small box. A box that in every other Egyptian context means a container, a source, a thing that holds power. The shape inside the vessel does not behave like a snake. It runs the full interior length and connects at both ends, the way a filament connects inside a sealed tube. And the entire object is propped upright by a pillar the Egyptians called the jed, a symbol they explicitly associated with stability and with raising something heavy into a standing position. Now, I am not going to tell you the ancient Egyptians had electric light. That is a leap, and we will come back to the skeptics. But strip the religion away and describe only what is carved, with no assumptions, and you get this: a sealed vessel, a power source at its base, a connecting element running its full length, a support structure designed to hold it upright under strain. That is not a description of a flower. That is a description of a device. The Egyptians drew it in a hidden, sealed room and surrounded it with text about lifting, about lightness, about making the heavy thing rise. The mainstream interpretation is not wrong because it is impossible. It is incomplete because it stops at the surface. It explains the picture and ignores the function. That is the first clue. Now we get to the one made of stone you can still put your hands on, and it is the one that breaks the timeline. Clue 2 is not a carving. It is the output, because if there really was a machine, it should have left evidence not in pictures, but in the rock itself. And it did. Drive south from the pyramids to Saqqara, and you reach an underground complex called the Serapeum. Cut into the bedrock are a series of side chambers, and inside each one sits a single enormous box carved from solid granite. 24 of them. Each box, with its lid, weighs between 70 and 100 tons, not the rough 70-ton blocks of an ordinary quarry. These are hollowed, polished, lidded containers, finished to a level that stops people cold when they see it in person. The interior corners are cut to near-perfect right angles. Deep inside a box you can barely fit a person into. The surfaces are flat to a tolerance measured in thousandths of an inch. The kind of flatness a modern machine shop achieves with a precision grinder and a granite reference plate. The granite itself, Aswan red granite, sits around a 6 on the hardness scale. Copper, the hardest metal the Egyptians are officially supposed to have used at scale, sits around a 3. You cannot cut a 6 with a 3. You can scratch it, you can polish it slowly with a brace of sand over lifetimes, but you cannot produce flat, square, mirror-finished internal faces inside a 70-ton sealed box with sand and a copper chisel. The geometry alone takes the explanation off the table. For a long time, the official answer was simply that the Egyptians were patient, skilled, and we underestimate them. And they were skilled. No one is disputing the genius of these people. But skill does not change physics. The tolerances on the Serapeum boxes are not a matter of patience. They are a matter of method. Something cut and finished that granite to specifications we would call industrial. And the Egyptians, in their own crypts, drew a machine and wrote that the heavy stone was made to obey. Here is the repetition that should bother you. The carvings describe a device that shapes and lifts stone. The Serapeum contains stone shaped and lifted in a way we cannot reproduce by the accepted methods. not similar findings. Not loosely related. The claim and the evidence point at the same impossible capability. That is clue 2. Now, the third clue is the one no one could test, because it is not about how the machine worked. It is about where they hid it. Clue 3 is the address. And this is the part that pulls the whole thing out of the realm of theory. Egyptian temple texts repeatedly reference a hidden chamber they called the Hall of the Hidden One, a sealed place that, in their telling, held the tools of the first builders. Not their bodies, their tools. The texts say that after the great works were finished, the instrument was put to rest in a chamber of darkness beneath the horizon of stone, where no man would disturb it until the proper time. The horizon of stone is not a poetic flourish. Akhet, horizon, was the exact word the Egyptians used as the formal name of the Great Pyramid itself. Akhet Khufu, the horizon of Khufu. Beneath the horizon of stone is not a riddle. It is a place. It is telling you to look inside, and below, the Great Pyramid. For thousands of years, that was untestable. We could map the known passages, the King's Chamber, the Queen's Chamber, the Grand Gallery. We knew them by heart. And none of them contained a hidden machine. So the texts were filed away as more myth. Then, modern science found something that changed everything. In 2015, an international team launched a project called Scan Pyramids. They were not treasure hunting. They were doing physics. They used a technique called muon tomography. Muons are particles that rain down constantly from cosmic rays, and they pass through solid rock, but they are absorbed more by dense stone and less by empty space. Barrier detectors inside and beneath a structure count the muons that come through from every angle, and you can build an image of what is solid and what is hollow without drilling a single hole. It is essentially an X-ray of a mountain of stone. In 2017, the team published their result in the journal Nature, and it stopped Egyptology in its tracks. Above the Grand Gallery, deep inside the Great Pyramid, the muons revealed a large, empty space. A void at least 30 meters long, comparable in size to the Grand Gallery itself, in a part of the pyramid where every map said there was nothing but solid limestone. They had not predicted it. They had not been looking for it. They called it the Big Void, and it sat exactly where the ancient texts said to look, inside the horizon of stone. It gets tighter than that. In 2023, the same kind of investigation confirmed a second feature, a corridor-shaped space behind the original entrance, around 9 meters long, again hidden, again unmapped, again hollow. 2 confirmed empty chambers inside the most studied building on the planet, both found in the last decade, both in a structure people have crawled through for 200 years, swearing they had seen everything. We still have not been inside the Big Void. As of now, no one has. The pyramid is solid stone. You cannot simply cut a door into the Great Pyramid. The only proposals to reach it involve a tiny robotic probe through a drilled channel, and even that has crawled through review for years. So here is exactly where we stand. The ancient texts describe a machine. They say it was sealed in a hidden chamber beneath the horizon of stone. The horizon of stone is the Great Pyramid, and inside the Great Pyramid, precisely where the texts point, there is a large sealed chamber that has never been opened, confirmed by particle physics, published in Nature, and still inaccessible. The void is real. The address matches, and the room is still closed. Now, here is where the story gets heavier, because this is where the resistance starts. The history of investigating the Giza Plateau is a history of things going quiet. Early explorers reported shafts and chambers that were later filled, gated, or declared off-limits. The Osiris Shaft, a deep multi-level chamber beneath the causeway, flooded with water and rarely opened, sat largely unexamined for decades, and was downplayed for years before tourists were ever allowed near it. Excavation permits on the plateau are among the hardest to obtain in the world. Proposals to physically enter the Big Void have been delayed again and again, reframed, deferred. Samples leave, and reports do not always follow them out. None of this proves a conspiracy. Bureaucracy is slow. Egypt protects its heritage fiercely, and it has every right to. But notice the pattern. The single most important, confirmed empty chamber discovered inside the Great Pyramid in modern history. A space the size of a cathedral nave found by Nobel-grade physics. And the dominant institutional posture has been caution, delay, and a steady insistence that it is probably just a construction gap. Maybe it is, but we are choosing not to look. We have the technology to send a probe in tomorrow, and the door stays shut. Then there is the line every honest investigation eventually reaches. The people who handle the most sensitive parts of this story tend to stop talking. Researchers who pushed hard on the lost technology question found their funding evaporate and their access revoked. The official explanation that the void is an empty relieving space with no purpose and no contents leaves a question it never answers. If it is nothing, why has no one been allowed to confirm that it is nothing? So, let's slow down. Because you have been listening to a very seductive version of this story, and you deserve the other side. Does any of this prove that the ancient Egyptians had electrical machines, sonic levitation guns, and a sealed power plant inside the Great Pyramid? No. Honestly, no. And anyone who tells you it is certain is selling you something. The Dendera carving has a perfectly defensible religious reading. The snake in the lotus is a known creation motif, and the priests who carved it almost certainly understood it as sacred, not technical. The Serapeum boxes are genuinely astonishing, but a handful of serious experimental archaeologists have shown that hard stone can be worked with abrasive techniques, copper saws fed with quartz sand, and staggering amounts of labor and time, getting closer to those tolerances than skeptics expect. And the big void, the crown jewel of the whole theory, may well turn out to be exactly what the conservative Egyptologists say. A structural gap, an empty space left to relieve the crushing weight above the Grand Gallery so the chambers below would not collapse. Empty. Purposeful in an architectural sense. Containing nothing at all. That is the grounded version. And here is the thing. The grounded version is still extraordinary. Strip away the machine, and the aliens, and the lost civilization, and you are still left with a Bronze Age people who quarried, moved, and placed over 2 million blocks, some weighing as much as 80 tons, with a base leveled across 13 acres to within a couple of centimeters, aligned to true north with an error smaller than a modern surveyor would casually accept. Finished to tolerances we struggle to match. You are still left with 24 polished granite boxes underground that make modern stonemasons go quiet. You are still left with 2 hidden chambers found by particle physics in the most examined structure on Earth in the last 10 years that we cannot fully explain and have not entered. The ancient Egyptians built something here that pushes against the edge of what we think early humans could do. Whether the answer is a forgotten machine or a forgotten method, the conclusion is the same. We do not actually know how they did it. We have a theory we like because it is comfortable and a building that keeps refusing to fit inside it. And that is what the carvings were really protecting. Not necessarily a power source, a capability, a way of working stone that we have lost so completely we cannot even agree it existed. Think about what that means. If the Egyptians possessed a method for shaping and moving stone that we cannot reproduce, then there is a chapter of human engineering that simply fell out of the record. Knowledge does not always advance in a straight line. It can be born, used, hidden in a sealed crypt because it was sacred or because it was dangerous, and then lost when the civilization that held it collapsed. We assume we are the most advanced people who have ever stood on this planet. The Great Pyramid is a quiet argument that in at least one narrow and specific skill, we might be wrong. And if that is true, it means our history is missing a chapter, and the missing chapter is sitting under the desert in plain sight. weighing 6 million tons, which leaves the one question no one can answer yet. The Egyptians told us a machine built their monuments. They told us where they sealed it. We scanned that exact place and found a chamber the size of a cathedral nave that no human has entered in over 4,000 years. So, either it is empty, and the most precise builders in the ancient world wasted a cathedral of space on nothing and then wrote elaborate instructions pointing to it. Or it is not empty, and we are standing on the answer, refusing to open the door. The carving is still in the crypt at Dendera, low to the wall, in shadow, where the tourists walk past it. The boxes are still in the dark at Saqqara. And the void is still there, sealed inside the horizon of stone, mapped by physics, confirmed in print, and untouched, exactly where the hieroglyphs said the machine was buried. We have the coordinates, we have the technology, we have the scan. The only thing we do not have is permission to look. If this rewired how you see the pyramids, do not stop here. The next investigation on screen goes deeper into what these builders knew and where else they hid it. Watch it now, before that door gets sealed too.